Welcome to the Modern Mythos Podcast, a show dedicated to Call of Cthulhu and other investigative horror games. I'm John Hook.
And I'm Seth Skorkowski, and together we'll discuss writing, game mastering, and player tips, and how you can apply them to your gaming table.
How's it going, Seth?
It's going great. The first 3 episodes have released, and reception's been pretty good. So it was kind of like a whirlwind. They all dropped at the same time, and of course the inevitable technical issues at the beginning. But
man, yeah, and I tell you, that is all me. I'm still trying to figure all this out, but we will get it figured out, and it will come out. People aren't getting it, so I'm doing something right. So I'm gonna figure it out so I can get it out to more people, and hopefully eventually I can crack that Apple podcast. The what is their Apple iTunes, right? I got to get it onto iTunes. That's the thing that's killing me right now.
iTunes still not doing it.
As far as I can tell, it's not on iTunes, but who knows?
We'll see. It's like with GMing. Your first tries, you get better,
right?
So
exactly.
We are actually just doing this as a giant allegory to the game mastering process. This is intentional,
right? This is just the world looking upon itself in an infinite mirror. There we go.
Yeah, that's the story.
So we're gonna talk about a couple of different topics in today's episode. In our first topic, we're going to cover how you can bring mechanics from other games into your Call of Cthulhu game. And for our second topic, it'll be for people who are looking to set their Call of Cthulhu game or the variety of different eras of Call of Cthulhu and sources that you can go to, game masters and players can go to really get a flavor and a sense for that time period, for that era. And it'll help, immerse yourselves into that game.
More like movies and stuff versus, just handing them a history book. And, but, stuff where you get to actually, kind of immerse yourself and be able to describe those details to your players or imagine them as a player.
Yeah. So cool. So let's start with our first topic, bringing game mechanics from other games into your Call of Cthulhu game.
Well, this is something that I love doing, and one of the big benefits that you get when you've kind of dip your toes in a lot of different games, and the longer you've been playing and the wider kind of experience you have with various systems out there, you see that there are a lot of cool tricks that a lot of games come up with that, Call of Cthulhu or whatever it is you're playing doesn't have. And you're like, man, I missed that. And so these are ones that we've liberally stolen and used in our Call of Cthulhu games because we've got that experience to know they're out there and they work. So different ones we've used and how we use them and, different ideas.
Absolutely.
And the first one I want to mention is Traveler, which is a game I've been playing a lot of the past couple of years. We actually just finished our Traveler campaign a couple weeks ago, and now we're gearing up for some modern Call of Cthulhu.
Awesome.
One of the mechanics that they have in there, and it's kind of an interesting mechanic, is with character creation instead of the classic way that I think most role-playing games have always done it, where your players go off, they come up with their characters, and then they present them to the game master, and the game master then says, okay, session 1, you meet in a bar or wherever, and your characters meet each other as part of that opening session to a campaign or that introduction to it. Traveler does it a bit differently, and they say your characters already know each other. In fact, they have a history together, and that history might go back 20 years for some or different things like that. So the actual establishment of their relationships and why they're hanging out together, that's already set. That kind of takes a lot of pressure off the game master, and it really links the characters' motivations to help protect each other. But the mechanics way that they do this is so each player they get to look at two other players in the group, and they say, okay, our characters met, and between them, they kind of figure out what the story was of how they met. So it's like, we met in the Great War, and I was a journalist in the Great War, and you were a doctor, or you were a truck driver, a soldier, whatever. And together, we had this little adventure. And in travel, you actually, each of you gets a skill level in one skill, the unique skill for each character if they want, or the same skill out of this little story. And the idea for Call of Cthulhu, which I have not implemented, and I am guaranteed that I will, is that will now be I will treat it as they're allowed to have a skill improvement check right off the bat before the game actually even begins. So if you and I were playing John, and it says like, okay, our characters met in the Great War, and you were a soldier, and I was a journalist, and together we did this. And if you said, well, I want to get a rifle because I was in the trenches, great. And then you do a skill improvement for rifle, and you might just improve your rifle before the game even begins. And if I did photography, I might get my photography even better than it got during character creation because of our linked story. But now we also have this added benefit of our characters have this relationship with each other that goes back, and we've got these stories about it that's already established. So in travel, you get to do that with two characters. So if you've got 5 players, each of them has 2 different characters that they're linked to, and that theoretically should mean that the whole group knows each other either directly or through their friend.
Yeah, and that creates such a great web of support for each other, and just I love the skill improvements. And with Call of Cthulhu, with the skill improvements, there's always a chance that you won't fail the roll, right? You'll roll equal to or less than your current skill value. And so, typically that is a non-improvement, right? There's no improvement. But I think in when you're implementing this kind of backstory connection with characters, I would make it so that even if you were successful on your skill roll, so thus you didn't have a traditional improvement, I would still maybe improve it with like a D6, right?
Yeah,
And then if you fail the skill roll, so that you would have the skill improvement, then you can make it a D10, as normal.
and I don't know. I think that's just a really cool. One for role play reasons, but also just sometimes you want that little bit of an edge on a skill that you can kind of link, because you can even say that what their backstory that they had together might have been some sort of adventure. It didn't have to be that you got rifled because you're fighting the trenches. It might be, we went and we got captured, and this is how we learned German together, or some weird
Yeah.
little thing.
Yeah. It could be a brand new skill that you add to that character.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think that's a really cool mechanic. That's something that I love with Traveler. I will be absolutely using that in Call of Cthulhu. I'll be figuring out how to shoehorn that in to do so many games going forward, because I love
I was
it.
going to say, when I learned about this rule from you, the other game that I really enjoy playing is an old school version of Dungeons and Dragons called Swords and Wizardry. It's an OSR game for D&D Zero Edition, First Edition. And I want to start implementing this during character creation for that as well. In that game, it's a level based character class kind of system, and the classes, each class has an attribute that's their primary attribute. So for fighters, it's going to be strength, and for wizards, it's intelligence, that kind of thing. And I think what I would like to do is, with the characters that you do have a relationship with, the attribute that gets boosted is based upon your friend's primary attribute. So if you're tight with the wizard, it's your intelligence that'll go up. If the wizard is tight with the fighter, it'll be his strength that goes up. It's just a
Oh,
point. It'll just be a point or two, because it's a totally different system. It's not skill based. But I am going to take a version of this, and I'm going to apply it, like you said, to all the games I play, because this is just such a great idea, and it really helps build unity with the players and with each other's characters.
Yeah, and I mean, because you say it's like you knew each other from years ago, and now you're reconnecting on your first game. I always like to also describe it as the Lando and Han Solo thing, where like they suddenly reconnect after however many years it was, and now Lando is no longer this scoundrel gambler. He's like mayor or president or something of this city, and Han is a general in the resistance. And they're all like, "Hey, it's my buddy." And there was a betrayal, but they instantly connect over this little shared backstory they have, so we don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of like, okay, so who's your new character again? And so like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I should like you. It's like, no, you're my buddy, and then forgetting the whole betrayal.
That is awesome. I love it. So that's a great mechanic that can, I think, be applied to every game. I wanted to talk about a new game, King in Yellow,
I
from
haven't
Pelgrane
played
Press.
this.
I have played a little bit of it, and I really want to play more of it. I think it's going to be a fantastic game. It is based on the Gumshoe system from Pelgrane Press, except this version they call it the Quick Shock Gumshoe. So mental and physical damage is not measured in points. You don't have hit points or you don't have sanity points. In this game, it's a card system. And so as your character is injured, you might based on the type of injury that was happening, the fight that you were in, or the monster that you were fighting, or whatever, the foe, according to the scenario, it'll say apply this injury card or this shock card, mental shock card. Apply this to the character if they've been injured. And these card systems are really kind of cool because it's more than just you've had a point of damage or 2 points of damage. This card is applying specific game rule changes to that character, and it can be pretty infinite. You could have a very large tree system where maybe if you've taken a really brutal injury, you get this card that's like pretty brutal as far as the limitations that it's now applying just to your character. But then after a certain amount of time, if either if time has passed or if a companion has provided first aid, right? Tried to help you in some way, either physical first aid or maybe it's a mental first aid, and you are getting better, but you're still not perfect. So now you can step down and trade in that card for a slightly lesser bad card, right? And maybe you even go to an even third slightly lesser bad card eventually. And then maybe eventually you're able to trade in for nothing, right? So now
Yeah.
you're representing being full. Definitely to try and do a card system for physical and mental injuries in Call of Cthulhu, it would take some prep time. It would take something, this would be something that the game master would really have to think about and prepare for, but it could provide a very cinematic method of doing mental and physical injuries to the characters.
Kind of a different way. That's something I'd probably like to start with, like a one shot or two, before I pulled it into an existing campaign. Like, hey, we're going to play this cool one shot I saw, and we're going to try out this card thing. And and if the players like it and you like it, then it's like, okay, well, let's work this into our normal campaign, or at least that way you don't I don't know, you don't risk kind of messing up your campaign as you're trying to like fine tune it. But that sounds really cool. I also like mixing up how stuff like Sanity works when it comes to like different effects of bouts of madness or stuff like that. So I'm all for coming up with something new, even if it's temporary, just to keep it fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And because the last thing you want is for it to feel old. You always kind of want that little bit of excitement or freshness to any of the mechanics, because at least I do. That's probably why I play so many different games.
Sure. Yeah. I do love a variety, and I am also always looking for something fresh to keep the experience of playing the game and having your characters be injured in either physical or mental ways, having it still be interesting. in the last 2-3 years, I've really been drawn for sanity loss to I start adding in hallucinations. That's really become something fun, that I've discovered that the players enjoy role playing, with and kind of leaning into some of these hallucinations where I might make a suggestion to a player, or I might, outright say, "Hey, you see this," and I've had you know players really react in strange ways when they're seeing these hallucinations. I was at a convention, funny enough, right? I was at this convention, and so I tell the player, I said, "Oh, well, you're," because he had described how his parents were very basically verbally abusive to him, and so now that's why his character has grown up and is doing this kind of investigative work and everything to kind of buck against his parents and everything. And so he had lost a ton of sanity from the monster, and so I said, "Well, your mom and your dad kind of step around the corner and they're very cross with you right now. He can't believe that you're wasting your time, your life doing this. Why didn't you study to become a doctor and all this stuff?" And they're not there. It's the monster. And so the player, he's like, "Well, my character is going to start walking over to embrace my mom because she's always been more supportive of me and protected me from my dad when he's really gotten into a mood." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, you're heading over to your mom." The other characters in the room, I have to tell them on the side, I said, "Your buddy is just walking arms open towards the monster." And they're like, "No!" And they're like, "We have to get him." And they're tackling him and trying to drag him back and everything. I'm like, "This is awesome." So hallucinations have become something fun that I'm trying to bring to the table.
The times that I have remembered to use hallucinations for like indefinite insanity, because you have your temporary insanity last, or like it lasts like that 10-hour lingering temporary, or just the indefinite. I always forget when we're doing a campaign to do it, and I think part of it is like I'm so focused on like the larger story that's always after the session like, oh damn, that'd have been a good opportunity. One shots I remember, and it is always a hit, and you would think that would encourage me to remember in when we're doing our campaign play with our long term characters, and it so rarely is even crosses my mind to do the hallucinations. But if you remember in Shadow of Providence, you did that gag with my character. That's how I died. Is they
Oh,
had
that's
set the
right.
monster on fire, and I failed every sanity roll. Actually, I did really good till the end, and then I maxed every failure. I think I fumbled one, and it was my daughter. And at that point, the other characters are so busy they didn't stop me. I just embraced the flaming monster.
That's right.
I love
That
that
was
character too.
that was fun. That was fun. So that's cool. Yeah, you can bring shock and injury cards or that type of mechanic into Call of Cthulhu from King and Yellow. I also wanted to talk about Blades in the Dark. Have you played Blades in the Dark?
Man, that is one that people have pitched to me, and I finally had somebody really explain how it works, and it sounds awesome. The problem is, uh, I'm always trying to learn some new game at some point, and I just haven't. It hasn't moved to the top of the pile. It's been like second on the pile of games I want to learn for like I don't know, like a year and a half. So yes, I want to play it, but I need to find somebody like trick him into running me.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'll see what I can do. It's not one that I have experience in running yet. I've only been a player, but it is fantastic. Blades in the Dark has a great mechanic that I think works or will work so well in Call of Cthulhu because in Blades of the Dark, your characters are typically doing heists of some sort. And that's not a far leap. In Call of Cthulhu, heists do happen, or there's just any number of other insane plans that the characters will and the players will spend hours of game time literal time at the table. They'll spend hours trying to concoct this perfect
Oh,
plan.
oh yeah, breaking into the place and stealing the artifact or rescuing so and so,
Yep.
because rescues are heists. They just the package is a person. And yeah, they'll spend forever planning it, and then immediately the first roll always fails. Just
Yeah.
is a law of the universe.
And so Blades in the Dark has finally kind of mastered that, to where you don't, as players at the table, you don't waste your time arguing over what the plan is. You just start playing. You're like, well, we are going to go to this location and we're going to do a thing. So you just start going to the location, and when you're there, you tell the game master, well, knowing that I want to get into this ritzy party, I bribed the doorman so that they will look the other way when I present my credentials, and they'll let me pass in. Boom. You just simply made that up. And now for the flashback, you simply make your roll to see, was I successful in bribing him ahead of time so that the doorman will look the other way. And so now, as a player, you're making that roll. And if it's a successful roll, great. The doorman that you bribed is there working that entry point. If you fail that roll, as you're approaching and you see the doorman that you had bribed, you see maybe his boss come up, taps him on the shoulder, and switches him out, pulls him into the party to work indoors, and puts a new guy on the front door. And now you're like, oh, well, so to get past the doorman, I guess I would have had to have done this instead. And so you just kind of, on the fly, you're making up these flashbacks and mechanics on how you got past certain things. So now, if you fail that roll, you still get in, but now there was a penalty, right? So now the new doorman required twice as much money for the bribe on the spot to let you in, or something else happened. Maybe you were able to get in, but now you couldn't take your weapons in. That kind of thing.
Okay, that's cool. I gotta see how much time that would shave off. Tremendous amounts.
Tremendous amounts. Tremendous. So it would be a ton of fun, I think, at the Call of Cthulhu table.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that just being a method you use in a lot of different heists or rescues. Because on my YouTube, I did a video talking about heists, and a lot of people mentioned that I needed to check out Blades in the Dark, because I was approaching it just from a classic way we've always done it, where it's like, there's the you get the job, and then there's the recon or research phase, and then there's the all part of the planning. And then there's the execution, and then the escape. And they're like, Blaze in the Dark kind of does that out of order. And yeah, I really do want to check it out. It's just always been the second game I want to learn, because something always kind of noses its way into first. I've got novels that I've been wanting to read for 20 years that are in that position.
Novels to read, novels to write. So yeah, if anybody's interested in trying to improve or change the way that your players handle making plans, inane, crazy, intricate plans, run them as flashbacks and just steal from Blades in the Dark.
Kind of retcon. This is how it happened, but we don't know until we get there what the plan was. I love it.
Yep. And then just however the dice fall, and now you're like, oh, all right, I had to do this. I had to give up this. I had to do that. And you just do it to get through it. Another one to kind of steal from Gumshoe system, Trail of Cthulhu, and this has been mentioned in the past before, is in Trail of Cthulhu, there is no role to collect the core clues. Core clues are just given to the players because they're in the right place with the right skill sets. And even if you don't have the exact right skill sets, there's mechanics in the game to where you kind of adjust your characters on the fly. So now they do have that skill set. Or the other side of that coin is you change the clue slightly so it will fit a different skill that is, known by the investigator who's in that scene, but you just give them the clues. And I like that, although I do it a little different for Call of Cthulhu, where I don't just simply give them the clues. I do like to have them roll for clues, but at the bare minimum, if you fail your skill roll, you'll get the bare minimum core clue. Having a successful skill roll unlocks additional information, and the more better your skill roll, the more better the information.
Well, and I have not played Trail of Cthulhu. I've read through it, and I read a couple scenarios that I was basically wanting to steal for Call of Cthulhu because I'm the type of guy that does that. And the first time I ever used that was when we played Pax Cthulhiana, which is a game Chuck talked about before. It was by this company called Two Starving Knolls. It's completely system neutral. Just play whatever game mechanics you want, and it's a Call of Cthulhu adventure. And on that one, if you get into the guy's apartment, the game master essentially just hands you all the clues, because it's not about discovering the clues and looking in all the closets and all this. It is about piecing together what the clues mean. It doesn't want to focus on all the little details of, we want to make sure we found every clue in the room, and now everybody's worried they didn't get it. But with Call of Cthulhu, what I've also done is I can't afford to have them miss the clue. So they're going to roll their spot. The answer is they're going to get it 100% of the time. But a failure might mean somebody hears them, and now they need to hide. You find the clue, but the floorboards creak so loudly that the neighbor downstairs, who knows that person's not there, calls the manager that somebody's breaking in, or they break something, or something causes that kind of adrenaline spike of, oh no, we screwed up. But they still have the clue in their hand. Whether they got it or not was never the question. The question was, how smoothly do you get it and get out, or some other variable, versus did you actually find it at all? Because, and we've seen that scenario where it even says they need to make 9 spot hidden rolls in this room to find all 9 clues. And I've always
terrible.
It drives me nuts, because if you make them roll 9 times, eventually it will fail. It doesn't matter if they've got a 99% chance. You're only increasing the chance that they're going to fail if you make them roll separately. But on some where it's well, you got a hard success. Okay, well, you got 3 of them. Where you got an extreme, you found them all. You're a badass. You found everything in there because you got an extreme success. Or I'll make them roll. And it's everybody roll. Okay. And it's and somebody's well, I failed, and I got 1, or I got this. I'm still about to hand them all out. I'm just basically deciding who found the most. It's who found what. But the answer was always going to be, you find something. You find all of it, because I don't want the game to stall, or my players to get frustrated or anything. So I like that aspect about Trail of Cthulhu, where it's not about finding the clues. It's about figuring out what they mean, because that's the fun part, to me.
I agree 100%.
And like I said, it allows us to focus on it because, it's the mystery. And I don't want the mystery to be, did we find everything, unless that's actually supposed to be part of the mystery. If it's supposed to be part of the mystery, by all means. But, a lot of adventures, we kind of assume they're going to find it, and then they don't. And you're kind of now I've got to improvise how to get past the fact that they did not succeed in what should have been an easy success to find all the clues.
Yes.
Now, one that I have stolen the hell out of, because I've used it in Call of Cthulhu. I didn't have to use this when we did Conan, because Conan already had that, but then we used it in Traveler. And I have also applied it to a couple of our little side cult games that we're doing. And I totally stole this from Dungeons and Dragons, and that is inspiration. And I think a lot of gamers, since D&D is so well known, know what inspiration is. But for those that don't, since the game works as a bonus and penalty die mechanic, where we don't worry about, you got to +1 because you've got the higher ground or all that. It's just basically roll twice. If you've got a bonus die, you take the highest. If you got a penalty, you take the lowest. And it's a real simple way to get through a lot of the math problems that used to plague us in older editions or older games. And Call of Cthulhu has also adopted that as well. And it's great because I can improvise certain modifiers on the fly that there is nothing in the book that remotely accommodates that. And Traveler did the same thing with they call boons and penalties. It's all the same thing. But what inspiration is if your player does something that impresses you. They have a clever idea. They do a badass job role playing. They do some selfless act. Maybe they freaking saved you a slice of pizza. Whatever. You give them what's called inspiration. And I always do it in the form of a little coin that I got from campaign coins, or I hand them this thing. Versus when we play online, I always have to just note it somewhere. And everybody has like their little icon they hold up, which is usually whatever random crap they had around their desk at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is you can't hoard it. You either have it or you don't. And you can cash that in at any point in the future for a free bonus die. And so if they're doing it and it's difficult and they've got a penalty, they can cash that inspiration in and wipe that out. Or if it's just difficult and they want a bonus die, they can cash it in and they get a bonus die. But they can also give it to each other. So if your buddy does something good, like saves your butt, or they're making that really important role that everybody needs you to make, they can be like, hey, man, take my inspiration. And they can only get one. So even if everyone has it and they offer it, they can only use one. And I like it because it encourages role play. It's also a cool way that I get to show them what I want to see more of. If they're clever and they do something really good, or they're just really organized, or something like that, and I give them inspiration, that tells all the players in the room, this is how you do it. I'm encouraging this through positive reinforcement. And it's also just a fun thing when they cash it in, because it's all of a sudden serious. Like, okay, I'm going to use my inspiration for this one, and it's just a bonus die. They might fail it, they might not have needed it because they already would have succeeded, but it's just a cool little simple mechanic, and I absolutely love it. So any game that I can figure out a way to incorporate that, I will incorporate that because it's just been so successful for us.
I wholeheartedly agree. I love that mechanic. I forgot what game calls it Moxie, but I love the name Moxie. So I always call it Moxie. And you use campaign coins. I have found at like if you go to like a gem show or something like that, you can get like a bag of these really beautiful polished stones. And they're fairly small and they come in, weird shapes and stuff. But they all seem fairly uniform as far as, having a similar color pattern or something. So I'll get a little bag, and I have several of them, of these polished stones. And I have a small wooden tray and a little bowl. I mean, and so when I play in-person games, I'll dump these stones in the bowl and put them out there, and that's the Moxie. And I haven't been able to, I have not used the thing where players can give it to each other, which I love that idea. So I'm stealing that. But I'll say, okay, you can get a point of Moxie, and so they'll reach into the bowl, they get their own stone, and then now that's it's on their play area right in front of them, and everyone I normally max it out to one stone. So when you use your Moxie, it is for Call of Cthulhu, it's always for a bonus die, and they can put that back in, or maybe they can I've also had it where if they felt like they needed more information on a clue, but they didn't roll very well. They rolled well enough just to get the core clue, but not well enough to really get a the juicy clue. They can spend their Moxie to get that without a roll. But yeah, I like to find different ways for them to spend their Moxie.
Like turn like a regular success into a hard success.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I like that. And I said, I like those mechanics that basically are positive reinforcement. And I've had people tell me how that is metagaming, because you're your character doesn't know that they have inspiration. So to do it because you know you have inspiration is metagaming, which I'm always like, wow, you sound like the least fun person in the world to me, because at least with D&D, it's like it's not metagaming; it's the actual mechanics of the freaking game. But I also just find that once your players get used to this is a reward you get for doing something, I they start playing better. Now,
Oh
sometimes you
yeah.
have a player that will be all like, I think I did a good job. I deserve inspiration, which that I have the natural thing of like, well, because you asked for it, you're not getting it, even if deep down, a lot of the times, like, yeah, probably right. But if another player says, I think they should probably get inspiration for that, I'm so much more receptive if like they're looking out for each other's backs. And I think that really just encourages a teamwork aspect as well as encouraging them to act in more favorable ways. So I have never once had a single problem with it. It has only been good. So I stole that from D&D, and I will apply that to just about everything. But that was like, I think it was the first rule we added when we started playing Call of Cthulhu, when we flipped over from D&D. It was like, okay, man, this all looks great except for I'm stealing this from the previous game we were playing. I'm not slowing this down. So like we instantly converted it. Like in the first game, it was already there because I think it's just too good.
I love it.
Another one, and this is more of a way to look at interpreting things. But so we've been playing a couple side games of Cult Divinity Lost, which uses the Powered by the Apocalypse mechanic. And it has its own couple interpretations of Powered by the Apocalypse. Every game it uses it has a slight different flavor to it, from what I understand. But it was my introduction to that mechanic. And one of the things that I really liked, and it's one of those things that I've always known, but for some reason reading it really reinforced that to me, is in that game, if there is not a dire threat in place, you don't even roll. Like, so if you wanted to pick a lock and you're alone in the room with the box that's got the lock, you just succeed. Don't even bother rolling. You get into the box. But if you were in the hallway of an apartment building and you need to pick that lock without anybody seeing you or hearing you or maybe coming by in time and spotting you, that's when you roll, because there is a pressure that is on you versus, yeah, you can just take your time and do it. So the idea is you only roll when there is an external pressure involved, and it works so smoothly in that game. And then I think back on years and years of playing many other games where I would make them roll to open up the locked box that's in the room. No one's there, and they fail it. Now they're going through these elaborate ways of prying open the box, and sometimes it's amusing, and sometimes everybody in the room is like, "Oh, Jesus, just get this stupid thing open. We want to find out
Mm-hmm.
what's inside the damn box." And the fact that it really spelled out, this is when you should roll and this is when you shouldn't, and that is it's very clear. Same thing with a lot of others. If there's not an external threat and they can take all their time, don't bother rolling. First aid. If you're not in combat, your first aid succeeds. If you are in combat, yeah, you better roll it because you're in combat. And that sped it up so much in that game. And that's another thing that I've just started employing in other games pretty much immediately after we saw how well that worked, as far as just the different way to look at it. The only hitch to that is Call of Cthulhu. Your advancement is based off of you make a skill roll and you succeed at the skill roll, and
Right.
that is the one hitch. So the workaround, because I don't give them the automatic thing on that. Like, I only do that if you actually succeed a skill roll, but I give them the option to roll it. And it's basically, do you want to roll it? Because if you make it, you get to have a skill improvement check. Otherwise, you can open it. And that's because sometimes I'll be like, well, I've already rolled that once this round. I don't care. Like, cool, let's just open it and get back to the game versus kind of fumbling through it. But with Call of Cthulhu, because skill improvement is done through successful rolls, that is the only hitch. Because in Call of Cthulhu, I want them to roll a lot because I want them to improve in those skills. And that's what the players want to do as well. But once they either have that skill that's improved, or if they're really bad at that skill, like, your lockpick starts at like, was it 15? It's pretty low.
Yeah, something terribly low.
It's like, okay, you're in the room, you got the lockbox. Like, I'm not even rolling it. I'm not even risking it. I just open the box. Great. Let's open the box. So that's the only hitch with that one, but specifically Call of Cthulhu or games that do improvement that way is you don't necessarily get the improvement check, which ultimately that's what we do want. But we don't want to also have the game just stall because so-and-so can't make that skill roll. Like we were talking about with spot hiddens.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen games where they'll write in the rules, only roll the skill when failure is interesting, when the possibility of failure is interesting. The rabbit hole that I can fall into, though, is I can find interesting possibilities in just about any failure, but you're right. If the situation is the character has no pressure, there's no threat of danger, and time is not an issue, I would just say you just do it. And I guess for the concern about skill improvement is I would say, your character isn't really learning anything by doing it with the luxury of time and the luxury of not being under pressure. So just opening it's not going to do anything. In fact, if you were to fail that roll, then you're going to feel even dumber, So I would say that skill improvements are only really worthwhile because each situation where that character was doing a skill roll in game was because the tension was there and the rising action was there, which warranted. Now that you've had your successful skill roll, your reward for that is having the improvement. So, yeah, I don't think I would have them roll even if they had plenty of time and no pressure.
Well, it's kind of like if your character is going to get in the car and they're driving to the store to pick up smokes or rope or whatever,
Yeah.
I'm not going to make them make a drive auto check. When I was a very novice DM, I would. And when we were playing Cyberpunk, we would have them total their motorcycles and bikes just constantly. It was just the most horrible thing because, and it seems so obvious when you are basically introduced to the idea of don't bother rolling unless it matters. But when you've never been told that, and you're like, well, you're driving a car, so you should make your drive auto roll. And then the mountains of frustration that leads to, and sometimes it's interesting, but in the in the larger view, it's just really tiring. And when the first time I ever read a game that talked about like, yeah, don't bother rolling for that, it felt like such a relief to me. Like, oh, thank God, because even though we could make it interesting, we hated the fact that our characters were totaling their cars for mundane crap constantly. And then whenever we were in a situation where it's like, well, this is going to be kind of tricky. We have minuses to the drive roll. So now it's like, don't bother. If you're going to the store, don't bother rolling your drive check. But if it's like, well, this is tricky enough to roll a drive check, it's a regular drive check. And if it's a really harrowing thing, that's when it might be a hard or a penalty die, or you need an extreme or something. But I won't make them roll that unless it's actually important. And what Cult did is it kind of broadened my interpretation of that to include stuff like picking a lock or first aid, where it's like, is there an immediate threat coming down on? Are we actually under time limit or something? And just the fact of how it worded it, sometimes it's just the phrasing. It was like, yeah, I'm just doing this going forward because I thought I had trimmed out the necessary all the skill rolls, unnecessary skill rolls before, and then you suddenly realize like, oh no, I still had a few that were clinging on like plaque. Yeah, I could just shave those off. We only roll when it really matters.
Makes the game go so fast, so smooth.
Yeah, and also a lot of the times your character is supposed to be good at something, and like you've got your character that dumped all those points. They have an they can read hieroglyphics at 60,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, okay, well, you're sitting in the museum or whatever all day looking at the vase. Yeah, there's nothing slowing it down. I'm going to go ahead and let you know what the translation is versus if it's unless it's supposed to be really hard, if it's just basic hieroglyphics, and a lot of times I need them to get that clue to freaking finish the adventure.
Right.
It's like, what's your hieroglyphic? 60? Cool, you win, go.
Yep.
Roll, and maybe you get the hidden subtext underneath it, which I don't know if it was in the Shadow over Providence or if that was something you added for us, because I think that's something you did where it's like, if you had Egyptology, you got it, but if you made the skill roll, you got the deeper level of meaning.
I don't know. Probably not. There is hieroglyphics in Shadow of Providence, but it's already all translated. You just have to find the clue where it's already translated. So,
Oh, well, that's probably where I screwed it up.
so another game that I've been really enjoying recently is Alien by Free League, and in the character creation for that, it's really kind of cool because and this really has no game mechanic influence whatsoever. It's just to promote role playing. Is that your character picks someone to be a buddy and someone to be a rival? And I guess the implement it implies that it's one person, but I don't think it has to be limited to one. You could probably have two buddies and two rivals, or one buddy and two rivals. I mean, whatever it is that you want to do, but with this buddy and rival thing, it's just supposed to kind of influence the way that you're going to role play when you are interacting with that character. And so, if you've got a character and your buddy is trapped behind a stuck door and there's a face hugger in that room, you're going to probably work pretty hard to try and open that door to save your buddy. But if it's your rival, you're probably not going to work that hard.
Or at least it's up to the player to decide. There's no uh, mechanics reason why they should do it. I really like that because it's really easy to ask your players like, hey, who else in this group is your favorite of the other PCs? And they're usually pretty quick to say, but I like the idea of also adding like, who is your least favorite of the other PCs? And the other thing that I really love about it is they don't have to necessarily reciprocate. So the person you choose to be your buddy, they might choose your rival to be their buddy. And now you can even throw in the role playing aspect of, well, so and so is trapped in there. I don't like him that much, but my buddy likes them. So now I've got to like help this other person out because my buddy likes them. And yeah, it's pure role play, but I really like the aspect that you're kind of prioritizing at least who your most and least favorite of the other PCs are. And once again, there's no mechanical effect, though. I might be inclined to do something if you had something happen to your buddy and you're doing a sanity check. If something particularly bad happens to your buddy, where
Right. Oh, that's a great idea.
and that might be just a bonus or penalty, whatever, on the sanity check, or it might be, well, instead of a D4, we're going to do a D6, which could still roll less, but it's a slight variation. Or if it's your rival, it's like, well, instead of a D6, just roll a D4 because you didn't like him as much, but it still can affect you. It's just they're your least favorite person here. So if the ghoul's going to eat somebody, there's that voice in the back here is like, well, thank God it was him and none of these other guys, especially my
Right.
buddy.
Right. And you could kind of intermix these. You could intermix some of these mechanics that we're talking about, because when you're at the table, if your character does something kind of heroic, goes out of their way to help a rival, that might earn them some inspiration or moxie, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the same act for your buddy, you didn't really have to go outside your comfort zone to help your buddy. So maybe
Well,
there's no inspiration or moxie reward for something like that.
or if they're putting themselves in danger because they're role playing, like, that's my buddy. I have to help my buddy. I might give them inspiration for that. It's like, you know what? You're sticking to that.
Sure, yeah, yeah. If you're really
But,
sticking your neck out,
and, and like I said, it's not a mechanic. It's just a cool little role playing tool. One of the things that I love about the Call of Cthulhu character sheet is that backstory section on the back. And when my players and I converted to that, and I was introducing them to it, yeah, I really had to explain, like, this is important as hell. And because, who is your favorite person? Which that doesn't have to be a member of the group. That can be, your college professor, your spouse, or anything like that. This is for someone specifically in the group. But I really emphasize the need of that, because then as sanity gets chipped down, the game master can move in and can change of those aspects. And since there's not an alignment in Call of Cthulhu, that backstory is pretty much how we determine your alignment, like what is in character for you, and
mhm.
then sanity can chip away at that. And I like that this is actually just adding one more column of different things that we can use to kind of establish who your character is, and help the player play them consistently and believably, and be in character versus purely tactical in their approach to the game, where like they're trying to actually have a personality that isn't necessarily their own personality. And I like that as just a different tool in the player's toolbox, because some it will get a lot more benefit from it than others. But I don't see that as anything that's ever going to harm your group, because there's not actual mechanics involved in it. So yeah, I love that. I love that about Alien. Alien's another game I've just been so impressed with. I really, a lot of it I like. I don't know how well a lot of it would work if you're playing something that's not Alien. I think you're kind of limited to only be playing Alien if you're playing Alien, but damn, it's so good at what it does.
It is so good. It really is. And, so we've been talking about mechanics from other games that you could bring into Call of Cthulhu, but the opposite is also true. You can take things from Call of Cthulhu out to other games. So something that I've done, I've talked about how I enjoy playing this Swords and Wizardry D&D version of D&D. And I've gotten into situations because I've gamed so much Call of Cthulhu that when my players ask me, hey, is it possible for me to do this, maybe there's a chasm, a split in the hallway that they want to try and leap across, or a pit trap they want to leap across. My first instinct is to try and turn that into a skill roll, but there aren't any skills in Call of Cthulhu.
I know you feel so, like, almost neutered once you
Right,
lose them.
right.
You're like, oh crap! How did we used to do this back in the day?
Exactly, right? So I kind of thought of something that I think answers that, and my players so far have been enjoying it. Is I'll figure out, or I'll just determine, as game master, I'll determine which one of their attributes is best applied to this. And so let's say it's going to be strength to leap across, but that could just as easily be dexterity, right? But and maybe I'll let the player argue, make a plea for one attribute over another. But once we determine which attribute we're going to use, as game master, I determine how difficult is this task going to be. If it's going to be a standard, just normal difficulty, then I'll have them roll 3d6, because 3d6 is what they rolled to create that attribute score. So I'll say roll 3d6, and your goal is to get equal to or less than your current value in that skill, in that attribute, which with 3d6 shouldn't be that difficult.
Oh,
As the difficulties,
unless that happened to be their dump stat.
I know, unless it happened to be their dump stat, exactly. But yeah, figuring on average, it's going to be a fairly average score. But as the task, if the task gets more difficult, I add more dice to reflect that difficulty. So now maybe if it's hard, it might be 4d6. Now you got to equal, you still have to roll equal to or less than your attribute. Or if it's really difficult, it might be 5d6. So adding of dice really puts on the pressure of how difficult it is to achieve that task. And that's how I will sometimes hack D&D to kind of put skill rolls of a sort in D&D.
I actually like that idea of it better than just the simple like roll a d20, and if you get below your stat, then you're fine. Because when you're doing the multiple d6, there's that bell curve, and
Yes.
you're still going to average with the 3d6. What's that? 10 and a half. So you're either going to get a 10 or 11 on average, with of course ups and downs on that. So then when you add in that 46, well, then you're adding another 3.5 to that. So what are we at? We're at 14. Oh, oh, you're the tip of your bell curve is now like kind of above what you rolled for your stats, which if it's your physical stat and it's your fighter, they're probably fine. They probably have a stat of 17 or 18, hopefully. But if it's your wizard or whatnot, and it's like, well, I could make this, but this is going to be a lot harder. And I think that adds a little bit to it, because I prefer that method over the D20. I think that's a cool way of doing it. And I like the way of penalizing by adding more. Or if it's real easy, and they're like, well, just roll 2. But if your stat is a 12 or higher, don't even bother. Yeah, it's just automatic. You make it.
Yep.
But if it's their dump stat and they've got a dex of 6, it's like, this is easy, but you got to roll 2d6 and still get below that 6, because dex is just legendarily terrible.
Yeah.
With Call of Cthulhu, and this is one of those things that seems so obvious once you are made aware of it. But if you've never been made aware of it, you don't think about it. And one of the things I loved about when I read it for the first time is if your character is trying to do some sort of task that requires multiple skill rolls in order to complete it, like you have to get your drive auto and your mechanics in order to fix your car or something like that, or you're trying to climb a wall stealthily. It's like you have to make stealth and you have to make climb. Instead of having them roll those two separately as two independent skill rolls, you just say roll the dice one time and apply that effect to both skills. And if both skills succeeded, then you succeeded. If one of them would have failed, then the whole task failed based off whichever skill it was it required. And the reason for that is I have done it the other way before. And even if they've got a good skill, the more times you make them roll, you're only increasing the chance of them failing in the long run. And ultimately, you don't want them to fail. But if they've got a 50-50 chance with each skill, and you roll 50-50 chance they made it, okay, now roll again, you've now reduced it to a 25% chance overall that they were going to succeed in the first place. And it starts making it feel hopeless versus roll one time. How does that compare to both? And it speeds it up. It increases their chance overall of success. And I know people out there had figured that out well before I read that in the rules. But when I read the rules, I was able to reflect back on years and years and years of not having that. And it was this huge aha moment for me. And in games that I've picked up since then, I don't even know if that's how the rules say to do it. That's just how I do it, because it is so elegant. And just roll once, we'll see how the dice fall.
It's funny because in previous editions of Call of Cthulhu, and I'm thinking 5.5 and 6th edition, there was a skill called martial arts. Of course, this was back when your fighting skills were broken down. So you had punch and kick and bite and grapple as all separate brawling skills, right? And you had martial arts as a completely separate skill. And in those early editions of the rules, this combined use, single roll for two skills, that was the rule set, but it only applied to martial arts. And I
Really?
don't, yeah. So if you were going to do a martial arts, you never said, well, I'm going to do a martial arts attack. You did a punch or a kick. You rolled your percentile dice. And if your percentile dice was below, because your martial arts was always lower than your regular puncher kick score. So when you rolled your percentile dice, if you rolled under martial arts, it was a martial arts attack, and thus it gained additional damage. Is all it did. But if you rolled above martial arts but below, punch or kick, then you just had your regular punch or kick. And if you rolled above punch or kick, clearly you missed. But they never extrapolated and pushed that type of combined mechanic to anything else. It was only to the martial arts.
Hmm.
So I like it now as well, being combined when necessary.
I came into Call of Cthulhu like basically the day 7th edition came out. So most of my experience in the old editions is either converting old modules or just through conversations uh, like this, which is kind of a huge benefit for me because I didn't have to unlearn the way things used to work before.
Padawan, yes. Unlearn what you have learned. I have been playing Call of Cthulhu since 1981, so I've played all the editions.
Another one that, once again, a lot of game masters over all the years have figured out their own methods of doing this on their own, while many more, myself among them, have always struggled with it until I read how Call of Cthulhu handled it, and it was a big aha, this is just how I'm going to do it forever, unless a game specifically tells me to do it a different way, is how they handle pushed rolls.
Yes, love pushed roll mechanic.
Because there is that they fail, I don't want to try again, and the fact that it's actually very clearly stated in the rules. This is how this works, and part of why I like the fact it's stated in the rules because a lot of your old GMs will sit back and is like, well, we figured this out back then. It's like I also like the fact it's in the rules because that ends debate. Like, you could point at it and go, no, this is how it is. It's just right there. And it's very clearly spelled out. So it's also consistent, and it's not kind of up to the GM's whim or how well the player can debate it of just how pushed rolls work. And there's that penalty if you fail that second time, man, it's worse. And it also allows us to have the penalty for failing that roll initially does not have to be the worst case. Which back in the day, if you failed your climb check, that always meant that you fell and you took X points of damage based off of how high you were, and that just sucked. Well,
yeah,
Call of Cthulhu is like, you fail your climb check. That means you're probably clinging to the wall, unable to move higher, or you weren't able to even start. You're standing at the bottom of the wall. You can't figure out how to get up it or down it. You might not have even started. It doesn't mean you automatically fall off the cliff. But then they're like, well, I want to try again. Okay. Well, now that is a possibility. And that has also really, really helped the game out. And one thing I do with pushed rolls that different GMs do it differently is I will also allow that pushed roll to be a different skill, such as, like social skills are a big one. Like, I'm going to try to intimidate the doorman. That didn't work. I'm going to try to charm the doorman. This is your pushed roll, even though it's a different skill, but you're trying to essentially get the same, those fall under the umbrella of, social skills. But it does allow them to change their tactic, and they have to say how they're doing it, which keeps them involved in the game versus, can I just try it again? You can try it again, but you have to tell me what you're doing. And it encourages that way of thinking about it. So I have absolutely stolen that, and that's just how I do it, unless a game tells me to do it otherwise. That's just my default setting now for just about anything.
I'm all on board with that. In fact, I extend that as well. If player A tried something and failed, and now player B wants to try and do it, because the focus is still on that item, like maybe they were trying to pick a lock or intimidate a guard or try and get past a guard or something, but because the focus is still on that one thing, it, to me as game master, it doesn't matter if it was player A or player B. When the second attempt is going, it's the pushed roll, and it can be from either player. It's still the pushed roll. That way you're not getting to the situation where, okay, A tried it, is not going to push it. Now B's going to try it, not going to push it. C's going to try it, not going to push it. Nope. The second attempt is the second attempt. And that becomes the push roll.
No, and I'm the same way. And I actually had never phrased it the way you just did. And I like that because it has to deal with the subject. So if the subject is the doorman that you're trying to get past it, and I try to intimidate him and I fail, and player B comes by, is like, I'd like to charm him. That is the pushed roll, because the doorman's not going to sit there while all 5 players try whatever skill it is once until we start over again, and that first pushed roll happens. From their point of view, it's the second attempt, and it kind of keeps that abuse out, where everybody attempts to pick the lock until we go all the way around, and then one person gets to have that pushed roll at the end. It's like, no, from the lock's point of view, this is the second attempt, and if you want to not be a pushed roll, you need to find a completely different thing to do. And that's how I've always done. I've just never phrased it like that. And I like the way you said that, because now I can at least articulate it. When a lot of GMs ask me how I handle that, and I've got this overly wordy way of trying to explain it. And
this will be the first time I've ever been complimented for being succinct. Normally, I am completely over wordy. Just ask my wife.
Another one that I stole, and it was another aha from me, is the Call of Cthulhu idea roll to get the damn game back on track. And I can't ever talk about the idea roll without once again repeating, I hate the fact they call it an idea roll, because idea roll means something completely different in other games than it does in 7th edition Call of Cthulhu. It means something different in older editions of Call of Cthulhu, where the players are stuck. Either they didn't get the clue, or they failed to put the pieces together in their head, and it doesn't matter why they're stuck. There's just, the point is, we're stuck. Okay, we can roll the idea roll, and the game will move forward 100% of the time. It's like we were talking about with finding the clues in the room. It will happen 100% of the time. The variable is what it's going to cost them. And I have run investigative games that did not have this mechanic, and inevitably the players would get themselves stuck. Either they didn't remember something, or they didn't make that one roll or do that one thing at that one time. Whatever it was, we're stuck. And the game, we're just banging our heads against the wall, because otherwise, if I just give it to them, the players feel like you just gave it to me, and they're kind of like bummed out that it was resorted to that. There's like some sort of resentment. And from the GM, it's like, I have to give this to you. Everybody feels dirty about it if that happens. Nobody is happy. And then if it's obvious, the player's like, oh, I sure thought it never works right. But the idea roll is a mechanical way of saying it is going to move forward, guaranteed. And then I like the way they rank it, because if they never got the clue at all, if it was so hard for them to have ever got it because they never found the key that opens whatever, then it's actually a lot easier. But if you had given them the clue and they had talked about it, and when they were sitting around discussing their plan, and they held up the clue and they mentioned it, and then they forgot completely about it, then it's a harder roll, because it's kind of punishing them for forgetting something that they clearly not only had, but they acknowledged, they discussed, and then dropped the ball on. Because I have also had it when players have wanted the idea roll, and it's like, you guys had it in your hand, and I can't believe you're asking me this. So I like the idea of like, okay, this is actually a lot riskier to get without cost. But at the end of the day, we're still moving forward. We're back to having fun. and I love that. It is absolutely wonderful in an investigative game because they can get hung up on something small, and you don't want it to suck the
Absolutely.
fun out.
Yeah. Players are not literary characters in books. Players can get analysis paralysis and they can fail to see the forest through the trees. And unless in a book, no character ever has that unless it's some sort of B string character and it's done to, that type of analysis paralysis is kind of articulated so then the hero will seem even more intelligent, right? In comparison to this other person. But because players are not fictional, they're trying to be these fictional characters, they get that analysis, and the idea roll is fantastic to help, throw them a lifeline so they can get past that blockage and get back into the game, get it back into the mystery, continue to follow the clues, and see where does the danger lie, and just go into it. So yeah, I agree.
Uh,
Idea
it,
rolls are great.
Idea rolls are one of the big things that convinced me to drop everything and start playing Call of Cthulhu, because it instantly answered what it was that where we had failed when we had tried to do investigative games in other systems before. And the fact that it just kind of clearly says, like, one, maybe two paragraphs, the answer to a problem that had been plaguing me for so long. It was like, oh God, this is something I will always use no matter what I'm playing. This is just it from now on. This is my solution. And I love it. I love the fact that players can call for it, or your GM can just say, okay, let's get this back on track. Give me an idea roll, which is also the other way to stop it from when your players really go down that rabbit hole of Crazy Town, and they're trying to solve that mystery in Arkham, and all of a sudden they're like, well, we have got to get on a train and go to San Francisco. And you're like, okay, we're kind of at our time limit here. We're not going to actually role play out your characters going all the way to San Francisco only to realize that they're wrong. Give me an idea roll. And it's like, at the train station, you've got your tickets in hand. This happens.
Yes.
And we're back at it.
I love it. Love it.
Now, the other topic that I wanted to talk about today, and this was actually from a listener request, and it has to deal with Call of Cthulhu. Most often is in some sort of historical setting, often the 1920s, but we've also got Gaslight or Western or Roman or any of the others, and it is players that feel that they don't know enough about that time period to really capture the essence of it, or really get in the frame of mind without, I don't know, basically having to take a college course on what the hell, the Victorian era was like. And just tips and suggestions to help both, game masters and players get that feeling, that mood, and also learn a lot of things about a time period that they might not know in an interesting way. And I actually think that's a really good topic because, before I started playing Call of Cthulhu, my knowledge of the 1920s was shockingly limited. And now I know enough trivia about the 1920s to make me sound interesting at a party. So I just want to talk about like different things we've used or can recommend to people to kind of give them a fun history lesson for really what they need for Call of Cthulhu versus filling out a report for class.
Yeah, agreed. And to kind of expand upon, you said this is something for game masters and players. And I would also say this is something that game masters and players should make a point to watch the same sources before getting into the game, maybe even have watch parties, but have the same vocabulary of context
Oh yeah,
for that system, because then when you're at the table, you can sometimes you'll be able to utilize scenes from these TV shows and movies and maybe character lingo or something like that as a shortcut and a shorthand for gameplay at the table. But if only two people saw this and three other people saw that, your language will be disjointed. So I think it's important to all of you watch the same stuff, and then you all have that same experience, and can tap into that from a language standpoint as well.
I also just like the idea of it being a watch party versus an assignment. Like, okay,
Yeah,
before you
yeah.
start the campaign, watch these 6 movies. Like, no, come over to the house. We'll we'll watch this together and make fun of it.
Exactly. I've got pizza. You bring the beer. Let's go.
And it kind of started with just a personal favorite of mine of all freaking time is the 1999 The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. It has got it's got the 1920s vibe down. It's got a lot of that, but also so many of those elements of Call of Cthulhu as well. You've got your librarian that's off on the expedition, and your kind of pickpockety guy, and but it also shows just a lot of just little things about that time and about that setting that you might want to think about, and or you might not have ever considered or been aware of. When we started playing Call of Cthulhu, we just my wife and I binge watched Boardwalk Empire with
Oh, very cool.
Steve Buscemi.
Yeah.
Love that show. But a lot of the stuff that I was paying attention to was, when they're doing a huge long drive, I guess, to New York City, they have to stop at like the 1 or 2 gas stations that are between that entire distance, which is something that you don't think about now, because now there's like hundreds in that span, and like their entire course had to be geared around there's a gas station. And that's what our entire travel plans are based on, is where we can get gas halfway through it, because that's
Mhm.
not a thing we think about. And also gets you in the idea of like certain aspects of clothing, how rooms are decorated, different things that you don't necessarily get by reading the actual history, like if you're reading a textbook of history, but just different things that might just be standing on the boardwalk as they're walking past, or just different things they talk about, really does kind of help both the GM and the player picture it, and also be able to note that they can add those aspects to it because they just weren't aware of them otherwise.
Yes. Yep. Yep. I love. It's not in our show notes here, but I also loved Carnival
Ooh.
on HBO. That had a great, and that's more of a 30s, but Indiana Jones is also kind of a 30s, but really, that still works. 20s, 30s, it's all still kind of in there. It's, similar technology, similar clothing, language. So yeah, Carnival was awesome for kind of getting the Middle America Dust Bowl kind of vibe.
Hmm.
The Indiana Jones movies was able to kind of provide a global, cosmopolitan view of the world in that time period, as well as what university life was like. So
Yeah.
lots of great stuff.
And if you're doing something like the UK, you've got Peaky Blinders. That
Yep.
large portion of it takes place in that period. And another one is, Agatha Christie, Murder on the Orient Express. Absolutely love the 70s version of that movie. I like the newest one with Kenneth Branagh, but that 70s one's actually my favorite. I don't know if you've watched both of them like back to back before.
Not back to back, but I have seen both of them, and I really also really like the Kenneth Branagh one. I thought that was really good.
The Kenneth Branagh one is actually, the actors are better, with one exception. The cinematography is insanely good. The one exception, and it is no knock in the world against Michelle Pfeiffer, but when you pit her against Lauren Bacall for the same character, uh, it wasn't fair.
Yeah.
But other than her, the actors in the Kenneth Branagh ones, I think all of them did a better performance. I actually just prefer the way they did the ending in the 1970s one. But both of them have their own little aspects that you get to see about that time period and about that world that you wouldn't know otherwise, especially if you're doing the Orient Express. If you're going to play something like horror on the Orient Express, there better be one or two movie watching parties to uh,
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
show that. A little bit later, by a couple decades, but on Her Majesty's Secret Service, Bond is on the Orient Express in that one as well. If you just ever want like descriptions of what that train was like. But there's a lot of Agatha Christie movies or shows, which a lot of them were in the 1920s and 30s. So unless they modernized it, you do get certain things like costuming, certain phrasings, or just what scenes look like, what streets look like, what the
Hmm.
cars were like, or what type of things they sell in a store that you might not think about because the 1920s, that's 100 years ago. It it's not necessarily common knowledge now, and especially if you're new and you've never really paid attention to it outside of it was the Rolling Twenties, and then there was Prohibition, and then there was a big stock market crash at the end, and there were flappers, and that used to be literally all I knew about it. And once you actually start paying attention to it, and you've got a fun way of paying attention to it, you actually pick up a lot of little details. Another one I highly recommend, and this is actually on the educational line, is there's a Ken Burns documentary, which means it's like a month long, called Prohibition. Have you ever seen this?
I have not. I haven't even heard of it.
Oh my God. It is 3 episodes. Each episode is 2 hours, and it goes over the range of prohibition. And that one actually starts, I think, in like the 1880s or something when the movement started. And I think the first episode ends when prohibition goes into effect in 1920. But some of the details about what life was like due to prohibition, where it goes into the speakeasies and how culture changed, and all of these aspects about that I had no idea about. But Ken Burns makes a wonderful documentary. It's just freaking fun to watch anyway. So I watched that twice, and I've preached it off the mountain to just about anybody that has a remote interest in history. Like, you have to watch Ken Burns' Prohibition. It is fascinating, but it's a long haul. I think it's like 6 hours total, but really recommend it. It is cool.
It sounds bingeable, so definitely can do it. I'll have to look that up, see if I can find it.
And then Gaslight, if we're doing Victorian England for Cthulhu by Gaslight, which I'm still waiting for 7th edition Cthulhu by Gaslight to release. I've been in a holding pattern for that for like at least 2 years whenever I got Hudson and Brand.
But things are so easy to convert. We should be able to take the Gaslight, Call of Cthulhu Gaslight, that's 3rd edition. At least it's 3rd edition for Gaslight, but it's written for Call of Cthulhu 6th edition. We should be able to convert that up to 7th, no problem, on the fly.
Yes, except for seeing what Mike Mason and company did with the 7th edition conversion of the main rules. I want to know what they're going to give me for the 7th edition one. This is how strong my faith is in Mike, and this is the pressure I'm going to put on him if he's listening.
Pressure is now applied.
Well, one of the first books I picked up and I got it was Cthulhu Through the Ages, and I really liked that little taste they give you in there, which I think it's like 3, maybe 4 pages total that they give you on the Gaslight era. And I really liked the class system. Like, you've got credit and class, and they're different than each other. And so even if your credit's high, but you're middle class, you're still like a penalty die if you're talking to someone that's of upper class. I love that. Or if you're upper class and your credit sucks, you still have bonus dice against the people of lower station than you, which as an American over 100 years later, that is so alien to me that I love it because it's so different than how we do things. But for Cthulhu by Gaslight, I always recommend Penny Dreadful, at least the first season of Penny Dreadful, of really showing that world, as well as the Johnny Depp From Hell.
Oh, yeah.
The first time I saw that was just I was watching a movie. It was about Jack the Ripper with Johnny Depp, and it was cool. The second time I watched it, I was actually trying to watch it for gaming reasons. So I'm really paying attention to the background and like how to describe the streets of Victorian London in all the fog. So it's actually a very different experience when you're watching something from the perspective of I'm trying to capture this for my game, because you do get a lot of details that you normally would just let fade in the background and never have paid attention to.
I would also, for Gaslight Era, in addition to things like, obvious things like anything Sherlock Holmes,
Oh, and there's a million.
which there are a million, there's a new show, The Nevers. Now, it has a sci fi fantasy twist on it, but it's set in Victorian England. And it's interesting because one of the things that we see in that show, and it never kind of dawned on me, is they were beginning construction, like really doing great construction on the tube system, the underground tunneling subway system. And, it had that classic, round tube shape, as they're forming all that and building with the bricks and all that stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess they would have had to start building that early, to try and design that whole network of the tube system. And it's neat to see something like that under construction. It's not a fully fledged out train system yet, but who knows what kind of horrors those people were digging through.
Oh yeah, that's when you can discover something, or if you're getting chased through the tubes, you can even describe the fact it's round. It's not like a New York subway or something where it's got a flat base because it's taking a standard train that we're used to. It's like you're actually running down a pipe. It's a giant pipe that has a track in it, and it's a little harder to like duck into a corner when you're in a tube.
Hmm.
So and even if you don't even give any mechanical effect, you can describe it that way, and that can also kind of help your players feel this kind of old worldly or different feeling about it. Which, it's, again, if you're watching it from the perspective of I want to know how to describe my game, you see so many details like that, and they really jump out at you.
It's awesome stuff. Great place to get inspiration. Another setting, Western, typically American West, Down Darker Trails.
Cool game, very very cool game. That's
Such a great setting, and there's so much out there that you can see. Pretty much any spaghetti western, right?
yeah. There's plenty.
Which there are plenty, but in particular, I think True Grit is a great film that you could watch, the original and the remake. Same thing for the 210 to Yukima, I think is what it's called. That's another good one.
What I like about True Grit is because it's it has at least the investigative element where
Hmm.
Rooster Cogburn is hunting these people down, and it's just a wonderful movie anyway. So now you've just got an excuse to watch that with your friends to get details. For
Exactly. There's a series on HBO called Warrior, and it's also set in that Western United States, but it's set in San Francisco. And so you really get a sense of what city life is like and what the police force is like in San Francisco at that time period. It's a great series, but it's also a martial arts series, so it focuses on Chinatown and the immigrants and, the racism and just I mean, it's a very entertaining series, and super action filled, and I love it, so it's coming back for its 3rd season soon, but check out Warrior if you're also looking for, like, a what a city setting would be like during, Down Darker Trails.
that's cool. That way, it's not. Oh, it doesn't always have to be out on the plains in some little one horse town. You can actually show the cities from then.
Mhm.
For Cthulhu Invictus, for the Roman era, I absolutely love the old HBO show Rome, which only ran for 2 seasons. But I mean, my cat is named Titus because I was watching Rome at the time. Uh, did you have you ever watched the Venture Brothers?
Yes.
I say one of my favorite cartoons of all time, one of my favorite TV shows of all time. And I always describe Rome to people of like, Henchman 21 and 24 is who you're following in Rome through the rise and fall of Julius Caesar, but it's all interpreted by these two dumbass henchmen who are pretty much nobodies that are just kind of the center point of the camera as all these huge events are going on, because it's pretty much how I see the two heroes. It's just these no name henchmen.
That is awesome and well described.
And the Spartacus show that I think Stars did, or was it
Hmm.
Stars? Oh, loved that show. It is, yeah. When I discovered Sam Raimi was behind it, a lot of stuff suddenly made sense because it has that bit of Sam Raimi over the top aspect to it. And that actually quickly tones down after I think like the first couple episodes, and it starts becoming a really good drama with tons of action and all that. But it also shows just a lot of details about the life in Rome. And I do like the fact that on that one, they wouldn't use certain words. I think was it like the or a? They would, when their dialogue, they wouldn't use those, and it sounded natural. Like it takes you a while to sometimes understand that they've actually deleted words from their dialogue unless they were absolutely necessary for the audience to follow. And I'm pretty sure if I watched again, really paying attention to that, they get more and more. They use them less and less and less as it goes on because the
Oh,
audience is
that is so
understanding it.
cool.
But the dialogue is, and I can't remember exactly which words they were, but they're not in Latin. They don't exist in Latin. So they just removed them from the dialogue. And the way that they deliver the lines, you know the meaning. And it sounds weird, but it takes you a while to put your finger on exactly why until you actually start kind of saying the dialogue. Like, wait, they're missing words.
Oh, that is so cool. So, since you mentioned that about the language, if I can just for a second, kind of to talk about Warrior again,
Yeah.
because the series it is 90% of it is centered on the Chinese community. When the Chinese characters are speaking to each other, it is assumed that they are speaking in Mandarin to each other, but when the show, when they're being filmed or whatever, they're speaking in a modern English dialect. So they're using modern language and idioms, and just everything is modern. But as soon as a white character is in the same scene and the Chinese characters are speaking, even if they're speaking English, which meaning that the in character characters can hear them, it is being spoken in this like very broken, very halting form of clearly English is not their native language type of style. And it's very interesting the way that they made those cognitive choices to do that, because none of the white characters speak in that same modern vernacular that the Chinese characters do when they're talking to each other. So every one of the white characters, they are all speaking in a really thick Irish accent, or one character is from Georgia, so his is a super southern drawl, and they all are using language as best that they could put together, as they would have spoken in the 1920s and earlier 1900s. So it's late 1800s. That's what it is. Being post Civil War, but it's so funny to see that difference, because your ears are constantly waiting to go back to the Chinese characters, because it's so much easier to listen and absorb the story from their characters.
When they're
So
so when they're speaking to each other in their home language, it is the easiest for the audience. I love that.
easiest
That's
for the audience, yes.
because the other option is, you go ahead, you have your Chinese actors deliver all their lines in Chinese, then you subtitle it, uh,
Oh,
which,
right.
which I do like. But now you have to read it, and which has its own hurdles because sometimes you can't see what's going on the screen because you're just too focused on reading the words. But that's a cool way of a subtle way of making that point of not only is these two characters speaking in non-English, but how much more comfortable and fluid they are in their home language. So that's a cool trick. I like that.
Yeah, it's really, really neat.
Now, one though that I want to mention for Cthulhu Dark Ages, because sometimes when you are on the different forums like Facebook and whatnot, and you people are saying like, "Oh, we're looking at playing Cthulhu Dark Ages, and what do you recommend I watch?" And the problem is you don't want something that's just standard fantasy. You want something that's more dark agey, and because that's not, it's not like Lord of the Rings or Dragonheart or one of the many fantasy movies we watch when we want to play D&D. But the big recommendation is usually the 13th Warrior, which is a movie that I absolutely love, despite all its flaws. But I absolutely love the Antonio Banderas 13th Warrior, and that was actually a book I read probably when I was like 14. Is the Crichton's Eaters of the Dead. Have you ever read that?
I have not.
Okay, it's fantastic. So essentially what happened is, back in the 1970s, Michael Crichton gets himself in a friendly bet with somebody because he had talked about somebody had said there was no way you can make Beowulf interesting. And Crichton said, challenge accepted. And so he rewrote Beowulf, but from the point of view of a historical Arab character known as Ibn Falad, who ended up in real life traveling with some Vikings for a short period of time. So he wrote the story of Beowulf from the point of view of this random Arab that they picked up who, due to some prophecy from the witch woman, kind of voluntold him he has to go fight these monsters, and that's how he comes back to report the story of Beowulf. And in the book, so Crichton does this like it is a translation of Arabic scrolls that are discovered, and it is presented completely as if that's the story. It opens with like historical accounts of the discovery of these scrolls, the history of these scrolls, the translations of them. And periodically, there are all these footnotes throughout the book talking about, this lines up with so-and-so's reports at the time or different stuff. So it's like you're reading an academic work. And it is also considered a literary prank because evidently a lot of people were fooled into thinking this was real. So fascinating little thing there. He also did the same thing with the Great Train Robbery in a lot of senses. But in the back of the book, where he cites all of his sources, and it is this massive list of books that he cites to explain or where translations come from. Among them is the Necronomicon.
No.
Yes, by Abdul al-Hazred, is referenced as a source in the back of that book, along with very real books. So you never know which ones on there are real and which ones aren't. So my theory is because this book cites, it doesn't even point it out, like really, it's just kind of like in a footnote that, this lines up with what was said in the Necronomicon by, that the story of the Eaters of the Dead, the original book, takes place in the Lovecraft universe where the Necronomicon actually exists.
Oh, that's awesome.
And therefore, the movie based off of the book that takes place in Lovecraft's universe must also take place in Lovecraft's universe, meaning the film The 13th Warrior is a Cthulhu Dark Ages movie.
There we go. Well done. I like it. I like that a lot.
It is
That's pretty good.
It's a wonderful movie. It has a few passing similarities to the book as well.
Oh, that's too funny. That's awesome. I love that.
going back to the 1920s, because of course that is the most popular setting by far
Hands down.
for Call of Cthulhu. When my players and I got into it, and we started watching our little movies and talking about it, I have this one player, and he is by no means what you would call a gearhead, but for some reason he gravitated to different aspects of that time. So he would go down these wiki holes and he would talk to me about them, like almost obsessively. And one of the ones that he went down that we both became fascinated with were the early day automobiles before, a lot of the larger car manufacturers absorbed all the small ones into a lot of the
Right.
brands that we're
Yep.
familiar with now. Back in the 19 teens and 1920s, there were a lot more car manufacturers out there because they either hadn't failed yet or been absorbed yet. And he got really into the steamers, the Stanley steamers. Have you ever looked into these things?
No.
So they were total steam powered cars, like a train engine. So you actually had to like put a fire in the boiler, and the boiler boiled the water. And
Oh my God.
instead of like exhaust coming out, it was like wood or coal smoke out of like this, as well as steam blasting out. So they look like they're really smoky when it's a lot of steam. But one of the things that made the Stanley steamers most famous, there were a couple others, really cool, is once the boiler got going, those cars had the fastest pick up and go out of any of them. So whenever they were trying to, like, you're racing cars, all the others, they had to like kind of work their way up to speed. The engine had to get going on your Model T or whatever. Well, the Stanley, if that boiler was good and hot and your steam was going, it just launched like a missile because it was instant, like full power. And so there were a lot of issues in the early days of automobile racing because like they have an unfair advantage because before the race starts, they like heat it up for a long time. But at the same time, they couldn't do a cold start like your car could. You had to get the fire going and you had to get the water boiling and everything.
Oh my God. Would you be required to like stoke it while driving? I mean, could you access the firebox from the inside of the car? Are you shoveling wood in?
I don't know. But a few years ago, my wife and I, for Christmas, we went up to, and I'm forgetting the name right now because I'm being recorded saying it, up in Colorado. I cannot remember the name of the place right now, and I'll remember it the moment we're done recording. And there is a hotel called the Stanley Hotel, which
Right. Estes Park.
Estes Park. That's it. I kept wanting to say Eureka. It's like that's in Arkansas,
Yeah.
but Estes Park. So Stanley Hotel is also the Stanley Steamer Company family. So in the lobby of the hotel. So I went there originally just due to the Stephen King Shining link.
Right.
And it never occurred to me it was the same Stanley. And there's a Stanley steamer in the lobby. And it was so we walked in, and my wife and I are having a legendary bad day because we got a phone call at home that our pipes had exploded. It's Christmas Eve and we're in Colorado. I've got friends vacuuming. Long, amazing story. But we walk in, and so I'm wanting to go to this famous whiskey bar they have, and I look over and there's a Stanley steamer that's just sitting there. And it was like, stop everything. I have never actually gotten to play with one of those, which you couldn't get in it. Like there was like a velvet rope like 3 inches from it. So like you could peer around. And so if you're sitting in the driver's seat, there are so many little brass knobs and valves. It was very daunting because they're so you're driving, you're like, I guess you're adjusting the steam flow or something. I don't know. But
Wow.
it didn't look like the normal way you would see the controls of a car. From the outside, it just looks like an old-timey car, but it didn't have a motor like cars do now. So this is the weird fascinations we got from looking up old-timey cars. And I thought, like, wow, that's really cool. Because he wanted to see if I could add modifiers for a steam-powered car.
Oh my God.
The other one we got, and this is where you can get the official car of every Call of Cthulhu investigator, is there was an auto company called Jewett. You ever heard of this?
No.
Nope, because no one has. Wiki this. So the Jewett, it was a luxury car. So you had to have some money to be driving one of those, not like those Model Ts that were a dime a dozen. and they weren't around very long. They were like 1919 through 1926 or some period like this, very short. And the owner's wife was a bit of a spiritualist. So embedded in the dash of every Jewett automobile is a medallion to protect the passengers of the car from harm.
Oh my God.
Is that not the most Call of Cthulhu sounding thing you've ever heard?
That is awesome.
I found tons of pictures of Jewetts. I've never found a photograph of what these medallions are supposed to look like. But once we found that, I was like, oh hell, this is the only thing
Oh my
our characters will
God.
drive, because it has a medallion of protection embedded in the dashboard. And this all came about because we were getting in the 1920s, and my buddy just suddenly went down these wiki holes. And whenever we'd hang out once a week, he's like, "Oh my God, I just learned this!" And he'd be sending me all these links to articles, and we sit there and chat about it. And when he found the Jewett, it was very much like, "Stop the press! I just found the craziest thing."
Oh my God. That is awesome. That is awesome. Every Call of Cthulhu game needs to have a Jewett card. That is freaking awesome. I love it. You know, in diving into all this history, especially for the 1920s, there are also things that are flat out ugly. I mean, even with Lovecraft and his literature, he was a bona fide racist, and so there are things that exist in the 20s that it is okay to excise them from your game. You don't have to have this ultra realistic interpretation of the 1920s. You can take out the rampant racism, the rampant sexism, homophobia, classism. You know, you don't have to have only white male investigators. You can have women and people of color and people of different genders, you know, a variety of genders. I mean, it doesn't have to be so tight to the 1920s. There might be scenarios where you want to challenge some of those aspects and see what the investigators, how they react to maybe some really blatant racism or sexism. I mean, but I would think that those scenarios are going to be few and far between. I know for when I run my games, I am not really interested in trying to replicate that, and I hand wave a lot, and so I'll have
Oh yeah.
characters, women who are detectives in the police force, which, you know, players will come back and say wouldn't happen in the 1920s. Well, you're right, that wouldn't happen in historic 1920s, but it can happen in my fictional version of the 1920s. Maybe she's a pioneer. You know, it's not like they're going to have an all women football team. I'm just saying, hey, we can have some pioneers, and those are the interesting characters. Let's tell stories with interesting characters.
Yeah, the history is meant to, I don't know, make the setting more fun. And if it's taking away from the fun, then don't do it, because it's not. You're not trying. You don't have to be historically accurate. It's your game that we're playing fantasy fun time in. There is no town of Innsmouth. There is no Arkham. And there is no ghouls scuttling around underneath Providence. So go ahead and change that. I will do a racist or sexist or homophobic character, but it's not the institutionalized obstacles that they have. And the only real times it becomes an actual hurdle is if like they're trying to interact with a character and they fail. Then it's like, oh, okay, well, let me tell you why you fail. It's because
Yeah,
they're a racist dick. And it's like, oh, okay, that's why I failed. It's not the fact that I'm not charming; it's the fact that they're an asshole. So at that point, it's more of the color of this is something that's there versus of an obstacle or some sort of hurdle. Because if you tried to make it historically accurate, oh my god, that sounds just miserable. Because
Mm.
it's actually very hard for a lot of people to even comprehend how just awful it was. So yeah, we hand wave a lot of it. We'll acknowledge this is there, but no, if you want to be a woman detective, be a woman detective. Which, by the way, I also learned because of Call of Cthulhu. Like I said, I know enough to make me interesting at parties. Uh, Before Hoover, there were two. I want to say it was two agents that were women, and then Hoover instituted an all male policy. And it was two or three. I think it was two because in the scenario I wrote, I had a third one, or if it was three, I had a fourth one who was now kind of working as a secretary, quote unquote, because she was trying to get in Hoover's good graces for him to lift this policy. But there actually were women agents in like that year or two of the bureau before Hoover took over, and then it became the FBI.
Oh, that is awesome.
Then also the first black Boston police officer was a lot earlier than I thought it would have been. I don't know. You're kind of looking it up, like like it was like, well, I'm going to have him. He's going to be black. I'm wondering, when did they finally get? Oh, actually, they got one earlier than I'm setting it. Okay, then that works.
Yep.
So because I look a lot of that stuff up, not to see whether I can do it. It's usually just like how how off am I from history by doing it? And then
Right.
and every once in a while I am pleasantly surprised. And other times I discover the horrors of the actual history and go, wow, well, that's not what I'm doing anyway. So move past it. But no, looking up the history and looking up all that, it should only be done as stuff to enhance the game and not detract from the fun or feel like you have to be limited. If someone says like, I want to be a woman and I want to be Hispanic and I want to be a lesbian, it's like, oh well, yeah, your life is going to be hell in this Call of Cthulhu game. No, just hand wave past it and
Yeah.
let them play what they want to play.
Let the players play the characters they want to play, and don't try and penalize them by creating this world that is probably very true and accurate with rampant hate, but don't bring that to the table. There's no need for it. They're going to have a hard enough time fighting the monsters. Let them just fight the monsters,
And I always did is like say, and you are, the woman detective is like, oh, and you fought hard because you're a groundbreaker at this field, and that's pretty much all it's mentioned. And unless they fail to persuade somebody, it's like, oh, it's because they're sexist. But it's not like I ruled them out as possibilities for them, because that would be, uh, well, it's just let them play what they want to play. So just enjoy the history, but don't feel limited to it. Now, another thing, though, if as kind of a crash course, if somebody wants to know what it's like to be in the 1920s, if you're going to play in a game set in the 1920s, as both a game master who's kind of putting this together and orchestrating it, or as the player who's wanting to interact with it, there's a few things that we kind of put together just to keep in mind as to how it is different than the modern day. And one of the ones that yeah, I knew about, but it took me a while to like really kind of become comfortable with, of like this was their reality, is the idea of the telephone operators and switchboards. Because a lot of time there wasn't like a phone number that you dialed into your phone off a rotary phone. A lot of times you just picked up the phone and the switchboard operator answered, and then you told the switchboard operator where you wanted to go. There wasn't a dial. It was just you picked it up and
Right?
started talking.
Yep.
And the long distance system at the time was nowhere like it is now. So you would like if you were in Chicago and you wanted to call somebody in New York, you would have to talk to a switchboard operator. It's like, I want to go to New York. They're like, okay. and they would literally transfer you to the next switchboard in line. And when they picked it up, they would send you to the next switchboard in line, and so on and so forth. So it could take a full hour before they actually made that connection between you in Chicago and whoever you're calling to in New York. And please, God, let them answer the phone and not be on the John or something like that. So your investigator, a lot of those phone booths, like in like the hotels, they had like a little bench in them, would just be sitting there forever trying to connect the phone call. And there was an episode of Boardwalk Empire where they actually did address that. That's nothing you really want to make a big deal about if you're running a game. But if they are going to make a long distance phone call, you can say, it's like, okay, well, this takes about an hour. And while you're in the lobby, give me a spot roll to see if you notice something while you're sitting in this booth for a freaking hour waiting for the call to go through. And that's when it's like, as the call goes through, you suddenly see the person walk through the lobby. And it's like, do they notice me? Or do I turn my head so they don't notice me? But those are just things just to keep in mind, to add that color of what the time is like. But, not like, okay, well, Bob wants to call New York. He's out of the game for the next hour. Just hand wave past. But it's a cool detail to mention that is very alien to us now, because now you just pick up the phone, you call New York.
Right. And you can use that technology as a limiting factor when the players are trying to my character would call the police. Okay, you call the police, but you're calling the switchboard operator and they're having technical difficulties right now. That line is down. The physical wires connecting to the police station are out of service right now. There's no way for her to get that connection through,
Well, there's no call waiting.
Yeah.
But also, your switchboard operator or any of the switchboard operators in that chain can be listening. So if you are calling the police or your client or whoever, the switchboard operator might be on the bad guy's team, or they might
be a cultist. Yeah.
Or they might be bribable. There was one adventure I remember reading that brought this up as a strategy, and it never occurred to me it was possible. Then it seemed obvious that it was. I want to say it was Pale Moon Rising. They brought this up, where you can call the switchboard operator and essentially through charms on the operator find out information about like who's been using this phone and who's been calling to, or about information about somebody else, like at a different phone, what's going on. So like you pick up the phone and you start sweet talking the operator into giving you information that never would have occurred to me that's a possibility.
That is a great idea.
Like, holy shit, especially in a small town, we've got like maybe one or two switchboard operators, and there might be that one gossip that's listening in on everybody's business. Oh, yeah, that's when you call them up. And you're like, hey, how's it going? And you just charm them and you're sweet. And yeah, whatever happened to so-and-so? They've been gone for a while. And that's an interview your character can do to a character that they never isn't an actual cast member. They're just the voice on the phone. So I think that is a really cool aspect, which is very alien to us. We don't have that anymore. A lot of buildings would have their own switchboard operators. I think if you ever watched like the first season of Mad Men, that was a thing where the switchboard operators are always listening in on calls. Just a cool little tidbit about what their technology was like, its limitations and possible advantages as far as where you can get an edge, or a keeper can bring the bad things down if the switchboard operator gets charmed by the bad guy or is in league with the bad guys.
I like that a lot. Something else that you need to remember in the 1920s is that travel by car, by bus, overland travel takes time. The interstate highway system wasn't established yet. So it's all these like 2-lane, sometimes paved roads, and gas stations were far apart. They were oases. I mean, it would take a while. You would have to plan out and be fuel efficient to get from point A to point B.
Oh yeah. And those roads, when you're looking at the map of Lovecraft country, it's like, oh, there's a straight line. It goes between, This point is like, okay, once you zoom in, that was the most windy country road madness because it probably wove around every single property line. If you've ever driven like deep country roads where it's like, yeah, you've never have a point that's 100 feet long without a turn. That's what that entire path is like. So nowadays we kind of look at it and say, well, if I'm going this speed and I'm sure that's a straight highway, it's going to take that long. I say, no, it was windy madness and probably unpaved. So if it had been raining, it's muddy as hell.
Mm-hmm.
There's not like easy to get alternate routes. So if a bridge is out or a tree falls in the way, then you're just kind of screwed.
Yep. Roads wash out pretty easily.
Or just a cow. So, but that time that it takes for investigators to go, in a lot of studies, it just says like, okay, you're there. But at the same time, you can also say, okay, if you want to go from Arkham to Boston, you have to understand that's a serious drive. And if you look at it, it's not that far. I say that's actually a serious drive. That's not you can hop over. I've used that as a way to encourage my players to remember that telephones are a thing when they wanted to ask somebody something, and they're like, "Why don't we just call them?" Like, yeah, why don't you just call them? Or if they're like, "I want to call them," say, the lines are down. It's not like there's 1,000 different options. If one line's out, that's probably the end of the story. It's like, well, it looks like you're going to have to do that drive, and that's going to take you almost all day to make that short little distance to get from Arkham to Boston to interview this person. So there's just little things to keep in mind as trying to cross the country even by train. That was a trip. And fun stuff can happen along the way, or you can just say it takes you 3 days and you arrive in Los Angeles. What do we do?
Yep, exactly.
Another big one that is kind of alien for a lot of us is firearms. That you could buy them in the mail. You just open up your Sears and Roebuck and order a gun, and your mailman would deliver it. Or you just go down to your local hardware store and you pick that up as well as a screwdriver, because there wasn't the types of regulations that we have now, including automatic weapons. If you're taking place before 1933, somewhere in the early to mid 30s is when automatic weapons started having legal hurdles. But before that, 1922, walk in, you could buy a Tommy gun if they happen to carry one. You might have to order it and then it get mailed to you.
But it's gettable.
It's gettable. Now, that doesn't mean you can necessarily walk down the street with your Tommy gun, because you still have to deal with the social issues, or if that town has an ordinance against that. But it wasn't like today where it's actually an illegal weapon. It's not that you have to hide it or you have to pay black market fees. It's just it was available. You could buy it through the mail. But if you try to walk into a church with one, it's going to raise a few eyebrows. And you might have some police coming up and asking, "Is like, so what's that for?" Same thing with concealed handguns. You can get a handgun anywhere, but if you were in a lot of jurisdictions, especially the major cities, you had to have a license to have a concealed handgun, and that license was often per city or county. Some cases state. So it wasn't like today where it's like I have a license for this state. It's like, nah, you might have a license for like New York City. But that didn't work here in Buffalo.
Nope. Yeah, guns were easy to get, but there were still some restrictions. So something else that to remember in the 1920s is that there's corruption. There's corruption in all levels of government. And these people were not above taking bribes. So when it comes time for your investigators to gather information, especially from some kind of government official, be it a cop or a council member or the mayor or the city clerk, don't forget about the bribery, because there was so much corruption that and people were so destitute If you're throwing money around, they're going to take it and they'll turn the other way because everyone's looking to get that extra scratch.
And it wasn't, yeah, it was frowned on, but it was also just kind of accepted of that's just how it works. It was a very different mindset than we're used to now. And if your players aren't aware of it, they might not think about that. They might try all the conventional ways. I'm going to charm them or whatnot to get past. I'm going to break in. It's like you could have slipped them $10 and either gotten an automatic success or like give yourself some bonus die because now it's a lot easier that you've greased a few palms. Then the other flip side of that is if they're susceptible to bribes and corruption, that can add another hurdle. Because if the bad guy has already bribed them or has deeper pockets than you, that can cause well, I'm going to try to sweet talk the judge. I made my charm. It's like, no, you see, the thing is that judge is crooked, and that judge has accepted a lot of money to not approve whatever it is you want. So even though you have made the law roll to show your case and the charm to argue your case, it's not going to work. But maybe you know that it should have worked, and that might be the hint that they get out of it, is the judge that's trying to approve a warrant or whatever. Oh, they're on the take. They're either in on it or they've been bought because you know that should have worked.
Yep, I like that. I like that a lot.
And then the other one is just the idea of prohibition. One of the things which we found weird when we started playing Call of Cthulhu in the 1920s is so many things of like your characters like, I want to get information, I'm going to go to the local bar, or your characters meet at a bar. How often bars were kind of a staple of every role-playing game we had ever played. We're in space, we go to the space cantina.
Yep.
We're in medieval fantasy land, we go to the tavern. In the 1920s, they had them, but they weren't the same as they are now because of prohibition. And it was like you had to be able to find the speakeasies. You had to sometimes know the proper password to get in the good speakeasies. And it wasn't the same as it is today, actually before or after. It wasn't remotely the same. But a couple interesting things about those that I think a lot of people don't know. And if you watch the Ken Burns documentary about Prohibition, you would know this, John.
Oh, inform me.
So the rise of coffee houses in the U.S. Was in part due to Prohibition because they served the same function as like the social place that you could go and hang out with your buddies after work. That was European or especially Middle Eastern thing. But it didn't really become popular in the United States until we didn't have booze. And all of a sudden, it became like, so John, you want to get a coffee with me? Became the new, you want to go catch a beer together. And it was also very popular with students. So, and actually, my very first Call of Cthulhu campaign, it took place in a coffee bar that had a speakeasy in it, but it was like you hang out at this coffee bar. But another thing that was kind of cool about it, so Prohibition was worded in a very interesting way, I guess, to keep the elites drinking. So you couldn't manufacture and you couldn't sell, but you could consume. So right before Prohibition happened, there were a lot of clubs, especially gentlemen's clubs, who stocked their liquor cellars and wine cellars with enough to last them 50 years. So if you paid your membership to this club, one of the benefits of the club was you got free booze. So they weren't selling it to you. It was you have your membership fee to the whatever club. So when you're watching those old movies and they're always in that fancy wood paneled club and they're sitting in the wingback chairs, smoking cigars and they're drinking. If it's 1920s, that's because that to them was just a free perk of whatever exorbitant fee it was to belong to that club. And some hotels would do this, where it's like, if you get a room in our fancy hotel, you get a glass of wine. And then if you make if you purchase something, some very worthless widget, you get another glass of wine free. As so, there was those sort of loopholes involved that I had never known about, but that was actually like the way that they would work the system at the time. So those are just cool little things you can drop in to that setting to describe. Also, why does your character want to join the whatever club that costs so much? Because you get free booze. Cruises, as we know them today, like booze cruises, hold their history to Prohibition. Because used to, you got on a boat to go somewhere. You know, I am getting on a boat to go to Ireland or wherever. There was never, we're just going to go putz around in the ocean in a bit and get blind sticking drunk. And I think at the time it was the 3 mile limit was the coastal border.
International waters. Yeah.
Yeah, I think now it's like 10 or so, but at the time it was just 3 because, you know, we didn't have missiles. And so there used to be a thing where you got on a boat and you went out to this ship, and once you're in international waters, the champagne started flowing. And then you'd like putz on down to, like, you know, Cuba or wherever and like circle it and then come back. And that was like the whole trip. Or you just went nowhere. You just went around in circles because you're in international waters and alcohol was freely available. So you would have ships that would come over from Europe or Canada or wherever the booze was still legal, and the ship would just stop there, and then people would go to the ship, and they wouldn't bring it back into the States. They just, well, they would, but then they would just go and get drunk there. And I actually would like to rewrite it for publication. I had a whole scenario that I once did that took place on the booze cruise, where the characters were trying to solve a crime that happened, but it was in international waters at one of these, like, you know, a boat that was this casino and all this stuff. But then, you know, of course, there were also deep ones. But
Of course.
you know, it's in the water. It has to be by law. So, but, you know, those are just weird little aspects of that time period that we just don't know about anymore because, and they seem so alien, but there were workarounds that existed and things that happened because of Prohibition.
That's like riverboat gambling boats nowadays. Yeah, they don't go anywhere, and they're technically on water, so it's a boat, but it's doesn't go anywhere. So
Yeah, so it's our loophole.
Got the loophole. Damn, Seth, that was awesome. I had a good time.
This was a fun one. I just enjoyed it. Which, by the way, you still need to watch Ken Burns' Prohibition.
Oh, right. Yeah, don't let me forget about that.
Was it Hunter? Right. Is that what I'm supposed to watch now?
Warrior.
Oh,
you will love it. HBO Warrior, 2 seasons.
Okay, cool.
So and good.
We'll do our reports to each other later on.
Exactly. Well, I want to thank everyone for listening. If you enjoy this show, please consider joining our Patreon. We have a Patreon. We want to give a shout out to John Sumrow and Joe Webb for supporting the show. We thank you very, very much. We can't do this without you. And I want to send out a special message to Ray. That message is, remember to check the magic bush for pizza. So go for it, Ray.
You have no idea what message we just gave. We might have just done
exactly
execute order 66.
John has a long beard. John has a long beard. We have a Discord. I really want to see our Discord start to get more and more lively. So I'm actually on there every day. So if you have questions and want to interact with me, Seth, I hope you.
I try to remember.
Join the Discord.
I'm on the Discord. I've lurked on the Discord. I don't know if I've ever said anything on the Discord. It is something that I have to remember to do. I'm on so many social media platforms, but Discord had more and more that are groups that are on there. So yes, I am there. I'm watching quietly.
Well, come out, join the Discord, people. There will be a link in the show notes to both Patreon and the Discord. Seth, you are putting our shows up on YouTube too, right?
Well, yeah, with our partnership again, you were the guy with the podcast experience, and I was the guy with the YouTube experience. So
Yes.
I figured, we've got the files. Some people, they don't do podcasts, so we've gone ahead. I've been putting them on YouTube. So either someone's listening to this on the podcast going, "Oh, it's also there," or they're listening to it on YouTube going, "Duh." But I've gone ahead, I've put them up there. And because I didn't want it to just be a static image the entire time it's playing for an hour or however long episode it is, I've at least added at least a little bit of things, talk about whatever module or show or game we're talking about. I'll show that. And if you're really, really, really quick, you can say when Cthulhu blinks, because he does. I think maybe on the first one was 3 times, but I know on the episode 3, which is the last one I did, he only blinks twice in the entire hour and 5 minutes, and it's the equivalent of 3 frames. So if you can figure out when he blinks, there's a quest to look for. So
That is hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. For those who might be having issues getting the show, I will also be trying to share the RSS link anywhere I can. So we'll be getting that out. I do hope that my podcasting skills become stronger as I'm able to disseminate this show uh, more easily to
it's all
everyone.
it's all
So
part of the growing pains.
all part of the growing pains.
We got nowhere to go but up. So I'm not worried about it. We also, John, we cannot do this show alone. So we really want to give a huge thank you to our amazing editors, Max Mahaffa and Edwin Nagy, for their hard work and their skills at making us sound like we are remotely capable of carrying on a sentence all the way through.
Herculean efforts. Herculean. So thank you guys. We do greatly appreciate it. We also want to thank John Sumrow for his badass logo. He is an incredibly talented artist, so please follow him on Facebook, check out his official website, and consider joining his Patreon as well. We will have links to all those in the show notes.
And finally, we want to give a thank you to the Darkest of the Hillside Thicket for generously allowing us to use their song Gluttony as our intro and outro music. If you're a fan of Lovecraft's writing and the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, then you need to check out the Darkest of the Hillside Thicket. Please check out their Bandcamp site and their official band site. Once again, links below in the show notes.
Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.